Welcome to the Puzzle Proof, where mysteries begin. Every clue is a deception. Every answer leads to more questions. Only the sharpest minds will see the truth hiding in plain sight. Miss Marple and the Mystery at Emberton Hall. Chapter 1. An Unwelcome Invitation. Miss Jane Marple sat at her small kitchen table in St. Mary Mead, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on her latest project. Her cottage was cosy, filled with the warm glow of the afternoon sun as it filtered through the lace curtains. There was nothing unusual about this particular day, save for the letter that had just arrived. It was an elegant envelope, thick and embossed with a wax seal that Miss Marple did not recognize. She set her knitting aside and picked up the letter, noting the name written on the front, Lady Rosalind Winterbourne. Lady Winterbourne, the wife of Sir Harold Winterbourne, had once been a distant acquaintance from Miss Marple's younger days. The Winterbournes resided at Emberton Hall, a large estate situated far from St. Mary Mead, nestled within the rolling hills of the countryside. The name had not crossed Miss Marple's mind in years, but there had been times when she remembered Lady Winterbourne fondly, elegant, composed, with a keen sense of propriety. So why, she wondered, was she receiving a letter now? Opening the envelope, Miss Marple quickly skimmed its contents, her brow furrowing slightly with each line. The letter was brief, yet urgent. My dear Miss Marple, I am in desperate need of your assistance. Strange things have been happening at Emberton Hall, events I cannot explain. There have been unsettling letters, odd occurrences, and now I fear something far worse. I have long admired your ability to see things others miss, and I beg of you to come and help. I cannot explain everything in writing, but I fear we are in grave danger. Please come at once. Yours, most sincerely, Rosalind Winterbourne. Miss Marple's first instinct was to dismiss the letter as a mere request from a friend in need of a chat. But there was something about the tone, an underlying sense of fear, that caught her attention. Danger, Lady Winterbourne had said. Miss Marple had never known the lady to be one to exaggerate, and that word held weight. The fact that she had mentioned Miss Marple's uncanny knack for noticing things others didn't only confirmed the seriousness of the matter. Curiosity piqued, Miss Marple set aside her knitting and pondered. She had not travelled far in many years, preferring the quiet comforts of home, but there was something about this letter that called to her. She couldn't ignore it. After a moment's thought, she stood, walked to the small cupboard and pulled out her old leather suitcase. Within an hour, she was ready. As Miss Marple prepared to leave, she glanced out of her window at the sleepy village. The streets of St. Mary Mead looked peaceful, as always. Yet, as she thought of Lady Winterbourne's words, a ripple of unease settled in her chest. Something was indeed afoot at Emberton Hall. The journey to Emberton Hall was long, but Miss Marple travelled with a quiet sense of purpose. The sun was beginning to set as she arrived at the imposing gates of the estate. The driveway wound its way through dense trees, and the estate's towering stone walls soon came into view. As she reached the front steps, she was greeted by the butler, who looked more than a little surprised to see her. Miss Marple, I didn't expect you so soon, the butler said, his tone polite but strained. Lady Winterbourne's invitation was urgent, Miss Marple replied calmly, her eyes scanning the mansion's ornate exterior. I believe she is in need of assistance. He nodded, but Miss Marple could detect a flicker of something in his eyes. A hint of discomfort, perhaps. She followed him inside, the grand hall echoing with their footsteps as they approached the drawing room. Inside, Lady Winterbourne was waiting, her face drawn with worry. She rose quickly as Miss Marple entered, greeting her with a tight embrace. The lady's usual composure was gone, replaced by an unmistakable anxiety. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm so glad you've come. There's no time to waste. Things are happening here that I cannot explain. I don't know who else to turn to." Miss Marple studied her old friend carefully. Lady Winterbourne had always been a woman of strength and poise, but now she seemed almost fragile, as if the very foundation of her life had been shaken. She had obviously been dealing with something far beyond her control. "Please, tell me what's been happening, Rosalind," Miss Marple said, sitting in the armchair across from her. She waited for Lady Winterbourne to speak, her mind already turning over possible explanations. Lady Winterbourne took a deep breath, then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, began to explain. The odd letters, the strange occurrences, objects moved without explanation, doors found unlocked when they were sure they had been closed. But the worst, Lady Winterbourne claimed, was yet to come. "There is someone here, Miss Marple, who seems to want something from us, and they will stop at nothing to get it." Miss Marple's interest deepened. As the evening wore on, she learned that the Winterbournes had been receiving anonymous threats, letters, filled with cryptic warnings. It was clear to Miss Marple that the situation was growing more serious by the day. Yet, as the lady spoke, Miss Marple's sharp eyes did not miss the subtle clues hidden in her words, the flicker of fear when certain names were mentioned. Something was wrong at Emberton Hall, something far deeper than the mere presence of a mysterious antagonist. Miss Marple had her suspicions, but she would need more time to unravel the tangled web of secrets that surrounded the Winterbournes. The game, Miss Marple knew, had already begun. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Garden. The morning dawned grey and damp at Emberton Hall, its heavy mist lending an air of secrecy to the sprawling grounds. Miss Marple awoke in her modest guest room, with the echoes of last night's anxious conversation still fresh in her mind. Over a light breakfast served quietly by a wary housekeeper, she resolved that the day would be devoted to careful observation. Something about the anonymous threats and whispered warnings had unsettled even the stalwart Lady Winterbourne. Stepping outside, Miss Marple was immediately struck by the garden's unusual disarray. The stately rose beds, usually a picture of meticulous beauty, lay scattered with stray petals and leaves. A gravel path wound its way through the hedges, but the stones bore fresh, irregular marks, tracks that did not belong to any known visitor of the estate. The early morning dew sparkled on the grass, as if hinting at secrets waiting to be uncovered. Returning to the main house, Miss Marple found the family gathered in a small, sunlit sitting room. Lady Winterbourne, looking every bit the elegant hostess yet visibly troubled, exchanged soft whispers with Sir Harold, while Emma listened with anxious wide eyes. Conversation was sparse, and every pause was laden with unspoken questions. Miss Marple's presence, quiet yet observant, seemed to prompt a subtle shift. The assembled company became more guarded, every word measured. Determined to learn more, Miss Marple set off on a slow, deliberate walk through the mansion's corridors. Her experienced eyes missed little, the way a door was left slightly ajar, the soft imprint of hurried steps on a worn carpet, and the faint scent of a long-forgotten perfume lingering in the air. In one narrow corridor, her gaze fell upon a heavy wooden door, whose polished handle shone in stark contrast to the dusty surroundings. Upon closer inspection, Miss Marple discovered that the lock appeared to have been tampered with, as if someone had forced it open and then, with deliberate care, closed it again. The irregularity of this detail set her mind alight with possibilities. Later, when the household's members busied themselves with afternoon routines, Miss Marple found a moment to speak with the butler, a reserved man who seldom offered more than the essentials. In a hushed tone, he confided that he had seen a shadowy figure slipping out into the garden the previous night. "I cannot say who it was, Miss Marple," he murmured, his eyes downcast. "It did not appear to be one of our regular guests." His admission, simple and unadorned, only deepened the mystery. Compelled to follow this new thread, Miss Marple returned to the garden as the afternoon light softened. Amid the tangled brambles near an ancient oak, she discovered a small scrap of paper clutched in the branches. The paper was creased and damp, yet a few words remained legible. Betrayal, vengeance, and justice were scrawled in fading ink. The message, though fragmentary, sent a shiver down her spine. Who had penned these words, and for whom were they intended? Had they been meant for Lady Winterbourne, or was it a warning to the household at large? As dusk crept in, Miss Marple sat beneath the oak, quietly contemplating the day's discoveries. The odd tracks on the gravel path, the tampered door, and now the mysterious note. All suggested that a hidden conflict was simmering beneath the genteel exterior of Emberton Hall. It was clear to her that these signs were no mere coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle that reached deep into the troubled past of the Winterbourne family. With the fading light, a hush fell over the estate. Miss Marple resolved to observe the household's evening activities with renewed vigilance. For now, she would gather her clues, each small detail serving as a silent testimony to the secrets hidden in the shadows of Emberton Hall. The day had been quiet, yet every whisper in the garden hinted that a storm was gathering, one that would soon compel the truth to emerge from behind layers of deceit. Chapter 3. Unsettling Conversations. The morning's discoveries had cast a pall over Emberton Hall, and by mid-morning a heavy silence hung in the drawing-room. Miss Marple sat quietly in an armchair by the window, watching the household stir uneasily. The strange tracks in the garden, the tampered door, and the mysterious scrap of paper had all unsettled her. Now, as the residents of Emberton Hall gathered, she intended to probe gently into their minds and hearts. Lady Winterbourne, her elegant features strained with worry, sat at one end of a long table. Beside her, Sir Harold appeared restless, his fingers drumming on the polished wood. Emma, visibly agitated, fidgeted with a handkerchief, her eyes darting anxiously between her elders. Even the usually impassive butler carried an air of apprehension, as though he bore secrets heavier than his duty. Miss Marple cleared her throat softly, drawing the attention of the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began in her customary calm, "I trust you will forgive my intrusion, but recent events compel us to speak frankly. There are whispers in the garden, and I believe the house itself seems to murmur its discontent. I would be most grateful if you could share any observations you might have had since this mysterious night." Lady Winterbourne hesitated before speaking. I cannot say I have seen anything out of the ordinary since the disturbance last night, Miss Marple, but the letters, the threatening words, they continue to weigh upon my mind. I cannot shake the feeling that we are all being watched." Sir Harold shifted in his seat. "I too have noticed odd sounds in the corridors, as if footsteps where none should be. It is unsettling, to say the least." His voice was low, but his expression betrayed a mixture of indignation and anxiety. Emma's eyes welled with tears as she murmured, "I saw a shadow by the window once, and I thought it might be a servant, but it did not belong to anyone I recognize." Her words trailed off, leaving a palpable tension in the room. The butler, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I observed, on the previous night, a figure moving towards the west wing. I did not dare to investigate further, as it was far too dark and unsettling. Miss Marple listened intently, her keen eyes noting every slight twitch of a lip and every shifting glance. "It seems," she said thoughtfully, "that each of you has experienced something, however slight, that might contribute to the larger mystery. I am aware that some secrets can be hidden even in the silence of a well-kept home." Her gaze turned kindly towards Lady Winterbourne. "Rosalind, you mentioned the letters. Have you been able to discern any further detail about their origin or meaning? Sometimes the language itself offers clues to the author's intent." Lady Winterbourne's eyes flickered, betraying a depth of worry that belied her composed exterior. "The letters speak of betrayal and impending justice. I am at a loss, Miss Marple. They hint at an old grievance, but I cannot recall any slight that might have provoked such bitterness." Sir Harold interjected, his tone defensive yet troubled. "There is nothing in our past that warrants such threats. Our family has its share of history, but I have always believed it best left in the past." His voice wavered, and for a moment the assembled guests exchanged furtive looks. Miss Marple's expression softened. "History does have a way of resurfacing when least expected, Sir Harold. I find that even the quietest households can harbour tumultuous memories." She paused, then added, "Perhaps we should all be mindful tonight and remain observant. The smallest detail, a misplaced object, a whispered word, might be the thread that unravels this tapestry of secrets." As the conversation dwindled into reflective silence, Miss Marple rose. The clues, though subtle, were mounting steadily in her mind. With a polite nod to the others, she excused herself to inspect the corridors further. The household watched her depart, each person left to wonder what further revelations might emerge as the day unfolded. In the quiet aftermath, the atmosphere remained charged with anticipation. Every whispered conversation and hesitant glance hinted that the true story behind the mysterious happenings was far from being fully told. Chapter 4. The Hidden Past. The atmosphere in the drawing room became suffocating, as though the walls themselves were closing in on the occupants. Miss Marple had seen many things in her time, many people, many situations, but rarely had she encountered such a tangle of nerves and suspicions. Sir Harold had not yet returned with the doctor, and in his absence the uneasy silence was broken only by the occasional cough or the rustling of clothing. It was as though everyone had become aware suddenly that something was very wrong, but no one was yet willing to speak plainly about it. Clarence Finch had made his cryptic statement, and though the room was filled with questions, none of the Winterbournes seemed eager to pry further. They were all too aware that their family's secrets were buried deep, like forgotten treasures that could only bring trouble if unearthed. Miss Marple, ever patient, took in the scene before her. She had already noted Emma's nervousness and the fleeting glance she had exchanged with Finch, but it was Sir Harold's sudden departure that weighed most heavily on her mind. He had acted quickly, as one accustomed to taking charge in moments of crisis, but Miss Marple wondered why he had not addressed the solicitor's cryptic words. Perhaps he knew more than he let on. She had learned one thing that night. The Winterbournes were a family of contradictions. On the surface, they appeared to be model aristocrats, yet beneath the veneer of respectability, there were shadows, lurking secrets and tensions. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened and Sir Harold returned, followed by Dr. Powell, a stout man with a round face, his spectacles perched precariously on the tip of his nose. He immediately went to the window, drawing the curtains back to assess the scene outside. "Where is Captain Crispin?" he asked, his voice steady, though his eyes were alert. "Out in the garden," Miss Marple replied, gesturing toward the rear of the house. I found him myself, unconscious but breathing. He needs medical attention immediately." Dr. Powell nodded curtly and stepped briskly toward the door, followed by Sir Harold. The two men disappeared into the night, their figures barely visible in the darkness. The others remained behind in the drawing room, but there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. Lady Winterbourne sat on the edge of her chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "What do you think this all means, Miss Marple?" she asked quietly. Her voice was tinged with a kind of desperation, as though she were waiting for Miss Marple to somehow reveal a solution. "I think," Miss Marple said slowly, "that we need to look at the bigger picture. The letters, the attack on Captain Crispin, the strange occurrences around the house. There is something tying them all together. It's not random. Someone, or perhaps several someones, is orchestrating events to create a sense of fear." "Who would do such a thing?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as she stood near the door, her hands nervously twisting the fabric of her dress. "Why would they want to hurt Bernard? He's done nothing wrong." Miss Marple studied her for a moment before speaking. "You seem very concerned about Captain Crispin, Emma. But I wonder, are you as concerned about the events themselves, or is there something more personal in your connection to him?" Emma's eyes widened, and for a moment her face betrayed a fleeting look of guilt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of confusion and fear. "I don't know what you mean, Miss Marple," she stammered. "He's just an old family friend, that's all." Miss Marple did not press her further. She had seen enough in that brief exchange to know that Emma's nerves were fraying under the pressure, and though she might not yet understand the full extent of Emma's connection to the attack, she was certain that it was significant. But there was time for that. First, Miss Marple needed to understand the history of this family, their past, their secrets. "Lady Winterbourne," Miss Marple said, "I believe there is more to the story here. I have a feeling that what is happening now is linked to something that has been hidden for many years. Perhaps even before your marriage to Sir Harold." Lady Winterbourne looked taken aback, but she did not protest. Instead, she seemed to shrink into herself, as if Miss Marple had struck a chord. "You're right, Miss Marple," she said softly. "There are things I haven't told you, things that have been buried for a long time. But I've always hoped they would stay buried. It's easier, you see. People like to think of us as a perfect family, but we are far from that." Miss Marple nodded, sensing that the floodgates were about to open. She had suspected as much. The Winterbournes, despite their outward refinement, were not immune to the darker side of life, the kind of secrets that could ruin reputations if ever revealed. Lady Winterbourne took a deep breath and continued. "Before I married Sir Harold, I had another suitor, an officer in the army, a man named Geoffrey Blackwell. He was charming, handsome, and he courted me for several years, but my family didn't approve of him, and I was very young and impressionable. One day Geoffrey disappeared. No one knew where he went. Some said he'd been sent abroad, others that he had left to escape trouble. But there was never any word from him. And then I met Sir Harold, and we married." Miss Marple's mind was already working. A lost suitor, Geoffrey Blackwell, who had vanished without a trace. Was it possible that this long-forgotten man was connected to the events unfolding at Emberton Hall? Had someone been seeking revenge all these years? Before Miss Marple could ask more, the door to the drawing room opened, and Dr. Powell entered, his face grim. "The captain is stable for now," he said. "He will survive, but he's been severely shaken. We'll need to keep a close eye on him. As for what happened, it seems he was struck from behind. A blunt object, most likely." Miss Marple's mind raced. "Is he in a position to speak yet?" she asked quickly. "Not yet, but he will be in time," Dr. Powell replied. "Very well," Miss Marple said. "We need to keep watch. This mystery is far from over." As Dr. Powell left the room, Miss Marple turned her attention back to Lady Winterbourne. "I believe, Lady Winterbourne, that the past has come back to haunt us." Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. Miss Marple's discoveries in the library had left her with more questions than answers. The aged letters and the secret journal had hinted at a long-held family pact and a missing heirloom, a delicate brooch whose disappearance had haunted the Winterbourne lineage for decades. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple resolved to examine every hidden corner of Emberton Hall. That afternoon, over a quiet cup of tea in the drawing-room, Miss Marple gently broached the subject with Lady Winterbourne. "Rosalind, you mentioned in passing the loss of a cherished family brooch. Might you tell me more about it?" she inquired, her tone warm but insistent. Lady Winterbourne's face clouded with sorrow as she recalled. "It was an heirloom passed down through generations, a symbol of our family's honor. Its disappearance was as inexplicable as it was devastating. I have long believed it was connected to old grievances, secrets that were never meant to see the light of day." Before Miss Marple could press further, Sir Harold entered briskly. "Some matters, Miss Marple, are best left in the past," he declared, his tone edged with defensiveness. Yet the fleeting glance of guilt in his eyes did not escape her notice. Later that day, Miss Marple wandered into the conservatory, a sunlit haven where the family sometimes sought solace. Amid the lush foliage and beneath the draping ferns, a glint caught her eye. There, partly concealed by a hanging vine, lay a small fragment of glass. Its jagged edges suggested it might have come from a shattered display case, the kind that once might have housed a treasured object. With deliberate care, Miss Marple tucked the fragment into her pocket, wondering if it was connected to the missing brooch. As twilight fell, Miss Marple arranged a discreet conversation with Emma in a quiet corner of the drawing-room. The young woman's eyes were downcast as she whispered, "I have often overheard hushed discussions among the servants. They say the brooch was not merely lost by accident, but that its disappearance was part of a deliberate act, a dark act of revenge tied to a long-forgotten slight." Emma's voice trembled with both fear and regret, and Miss Marple sensed that the truth was weighed down by painful secrets. In hushed tones later, the housekeeper confided to Miss Marple that Sir Harold had long been secretive about a locked cabinet in his private study. "No one is allowed to see inside," she confided. "It is said to contain personal letters and relics of our family's past, perhaps even items connected to that fabled heirloom." This revelation only deepened Miss Marple's suspicions. Was the cabinet hiding evidence of betrayal, or concealing the very item that had vanished so mysteriously? That night, restless and intent on pursuing every clue, Miss Marple returned to the library. In a secluded corner behind a row of neglected volumes, she discovered a hidden compartment cleverly built into the shelf. Within lay a small, leather-bound envelope. Its contents, though yellowed with age, included an unfinished letter that referred cryptically to a debt of honor and mentioned the brooch by name. The delicate feminine handwriting suggested that a woman of the family had once been compelled to keep a dangerous secret. Each fragment, the glass shard, the locked cabinet, the hidden envelope, was a silent testament to a past riddled with betrayal and unspoken grudges. As midnight approached and the hall grew quiet, Miss Marple sat by the library window, her mind methodically piecing together the evidence. It was clear that the disappearance of the heirloom was no random misfortune, but a calculated act entwined with the Winterbournes' troubled history. In the gathering darkness, Miss Marple resolved to remain vigilant. The The shadows of Emberton Hall were stirring with secrets of old, and with each small clue uncovered, the tapestry of deception and revenge was slowly unraveling. The truth, she knew, was hidden in the smallest details, and she would not rest until every last secret had been brought to light. Chapter 6. In the Study of Secrets. Miss Marple's investigation led her next to the private study of Sir Harold Winterbourne, a room of quiet authority, seldom entered by the rest of the household. Earlier, whispers had mentioned a locked cabinet therein, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover its contents. The study, with its dark oak panelling and heavy drapes, exuded an atmosphere of well-guarded memories. A solitary desk, meticulously organized, sat in the center of the room, while shelves lined with leather-bound volumes flanked a large imposing cabinet whose door was firmly shut. Miss Marple lingered near the desk, carefully examining the arrangement of papers and personal effects. A delicate porcelain figurine, slightly askew on a side table, drew her attention. Its position suggested it had been disturbed recently. The butler had mentioned that Sir Harold had been particularly protective of this room. Yet it was in such moments of vulnerability that the truth often revealed itself. After a few minutes, she heard the soft sound of footsteps outside. Thinking quickly, she slipped behind a tall bookshelf, her eyes narrowing as Sir Harold entered the study. He moved with a measured haste, his manner betraying a hidden agitation. Pausing at the locked cabinet, he produced a small key from his pocket. Miss Marple's heart quickened as she observed him open it with deliberate care. For a moment, his back was turned to her hiding place, and she seized the opportunity to listen. In a low murmur, Sir Harold muttered, "It must be kept safe. Too many years of disgrace." His words were vague, but laced with regret. The tone hinted at a secret too weighty to be shared openly. Miss Marple, maintaining her calm, watched as he replaced the contents and closed the cabinet securely. Once he left, she emerged from her concealment. The brief glimpse of his furtive actions only deepened her suspicions that the cabinet held items connected to the missing family brooch and other long-buried grievances. Returning later to the library, Miss Marple compared the new information with the documents she had found earlier. The leather-bound envelope and the letters hinted at an unpaid debt of honor and alluded to the brooch as a symbol of that debt. Had Sir Harold's actions in his study been meant to conceal evidence of a scandal? The carefully controlled facade of the Winterbourne family now seemed to hide layers of secret history. Determined to gather further evidence, Miss Marple arranged a private conversation with Emma. In the hushed atmosphere of a secluded sitting room, Emma's voice trembled as she admitted, "I have long suspected that Father's disappearance and the loss of the brooch were not accidents. There were murmurs among the servants that Father had been forced out to silence his involvement in something dreadful." Emma paused, her eyes glistening with remorse. "I fear that my own existence, so carefully hidden, is part of this dark chapter." Her confession confirmed Miss Marple's belief that the missing brooch was only one strand in a tangled web of deceit and betrayal. With each revelation, the puzzle took on a more sinister cast. The locked cabinet in Sir Harold's study, the hidden envelope in the library, and Emma's guarded memories now formed a pattern pointing to an old betrayal, a debt that had driven some to conceal the truth at all costs. Later that evening, while the household gathered for a modest supper, Miss Marple sat quietly, her mind piecing together the clues. The faint evidence from the study, the subtle hints from family members, and the cryptic messages of the past all converged in her thoughts. It was clear that the Winterbourne legacy was marred by an old transgression, one that had been kept secret for decades and was now surfacing with unexpected force. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple resolved that tomorrow she would press gently for further details. In the stillness of Emberton Hall, every shadow seemed to whisper secrets of the past. The locked cabinet's mystery was a crucial thread in the tapestry of hidden grievances, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it, one careful observation at a time. Chapter 7. The Gathering of Shadows. Miss Marple resolved that it was time to draw together the threads of evidence into a single, illuminating tapestry. Late that evening, as a cool mist crept over Emberton Hall, she summoned the key figures to the drawing room. The soft glow of the fireplace illuminated anxious faces. Lady Winterbourne sat demurely beside Sir Harold, whose rigid posture betrayed a secret burden, while Emma fidgeted in silence, her eyes glistening with unspoken worry. Even the ever-watchful butler appeared subdued, his normally impassive face etched with tension. "Thank you all for joining me," Miss Marple began, her voice quiet, yet unwavering. "I had spent the day gathering clues from every hidden corner of this house. It seems that the past, long thought to be forgotten, has once again cast its long shadow over our present." Her gaze swept the room, landing briefly on each person, as if weighing their hearts against their words. Lady Winterbourne's eyes dropped. "Miss Marple, I only wish for peace here," she murmured, wringing her hands. "I cannot imagine what old quarrel could now disturb us so." Miss Marple inclined her head. "Sometimes, Rosalind, old wounds never fully heal. I have uncovered letters and a journal, remnants of a pact made in sorrow and secrecy. They speak of an unpaid debt of honor and a cherished family heirloom that disappeared many years ago. I believe this missing brooch was not merely lost, but taken in a deliberate act of revenge." Sir Harold's features tightened. "That brooch is a memory of happier times," he declared, his tone clipped. "It belonged to our ancestors, and its loss has always been painful, but I assure you it was never meant to be found." His voice, though firm, wavered as if he were battling inner demons. Emma's voice broke the stillness. "I have heard whispers among the servants," she confessed softly. "They say the brooch's disappearance was linked to a great wrong, a betrayal that led to silence and shame. I have feared that my own hidden past is tangled with these secrets." Her eyes darted nervously between her aunt and Sir Harold, as though seeking an answer in their expressions. The butler, standing quietly in the corner, cleared his throat. "I recall, Miss Marple," he said hesitantly, "that last night I observed a figure lingering near the west wing. It was as if someone was intent on retracing steps best left undisturbed." His admission only deepened the murmur of disquiet among the assembly. Miss Marple pressed on gently. "And there is more. In Sir Harold's study I witnessed a moment of furtive action, a key turning in a locked cabinet that I suspect guarded the remnants of that old grievance." Her eyes met Sir Harold's, and for a long moment silence reigned, heavy and expectant. "Why hide such matters?" Lady Winterbourne asked, her voice trembling with a mix of grief and indignation. "Our family has suffered enough from old wounds left untreated." Sir Harold's face paled as he struggled for words. "Some secrets once revealed can destroy the very fabric of a family," he said, his tone subdued. "I did what I believed was necessary at the time." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "I understand the burden of guilt and the impulse to protect one's honor. But when the past is left unaddressed, it festers and comes back in unexpected and dangerous ways." Her gaze softened as she addressed Emma. "And sometimes the hidden truths of one's origins must be confronted, however painful they may be. The room fell into a heavy silence, the fire's crackle, the only sound amid the charged atmosphere. Each person sat with their thoughts, the weight of their shared history settling like dust over the ancient woodwork. Miss Marple knew that tonight the seeds of future revelations had been sown, yet she also sensed that the full truth, its final, unmasking bloom, was yet to come. With measured resolve, she concluded, "We must be prepared to confront what these shadows conceal. In time, all secrets will see the light." And as the clock chimed softly in the background, Emberton Hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next twist in its tangled tale. Chapter 8. Justice and Closure. The storm outside had subsided by dawn, leaving Emberton Hall cloaked in a damp, eerie silence. In the drawing room, the household had gathered once more. The earlier tension had given way to a heavy expectancy, as if everyone sensed that the secrets of the past were nearing their final unraveling. Miss Marple, steady and calm, stood before them with her evidence in hand, a bundle of letters, the torn journal pages, the glass fragment, and her recollections of that furtive moment in Sir Harold's study. "Ladies and gentlemen," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but imbued with quiet authority, "the shadows that have long haunted this house were not conjured by fancy, but by a dark deed committed many years ago. I have pieced together the clues left behind, a pact forged in grief and secrecy, the disappearance of a cherished brooch, and the desperate measures taken to conceal an unsavory truth." All eyes turned to Sir Harold, whose features had grown pallid since the gathering in the previous evening. His hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together. Lady Winterbourne's eyes brimmed with sorrow and dread, while Emma sat with downcast eyes as if bracing herself for what was to come. Even the butler appeared tense, every muscle in his face taut with unspoken apprehension. Miss Marple continued, "The missing heirloom, a delicate brooch that symbolized honor and was treasured by this family, was not simply lost. It was removed deliberately. In the conservatory, a broken shard of glass confirmed that the display case in which the brooch once rested was forcefully tampered with, and in Sir Harold's private study I witnessed an act of furtive concealment when you, Sir Harold, used a key to secure a locked cabinet. I have no doubt that this cabinet held evidence of the past betrayal that has long festered in your heart." A murmur ran through the room. Sir Harold's eyes lowered as he struggled for composure. Finally, with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades, he spoke. "I did what I believed was necessary," he admitted in a broken voice. "Many years ago there was a matter, an indiscretion that could have ruined us all. I took it upon myself to ensure that our family's honor was preserved. The brooch, it was the symbol of that honor. When it became the focus of old grudges, I resolved to hide it away, to bury that painful secret." Lady Winterbourne's soft gasp filled the silence. "But Harold," she whispered, "what secret? What betrayal have you kept hidden?" Sir Harold's gaze flickered between her and Miss Marple, and tears glistened in his eyes. "It was not only a matter of pride," he confessed. "I was involved in forcing aside a man dear to Rosalind, an injustice that was never spoken of. I feared that if the truth were to emerge, it would destroy everything we have built. The threatening letters, the strange happenings, were all my attempt to scare away anyone who might unearth that long-buried transgression." Miss Marple's steady tone cut through the gloom. "In trying to preserve honor, you have sown the seeds of despair and deceit. The truth, though painful, must now be acknowledged so that this dark chapter can come to an end." A heavy silence fell, as Sir Harold bowed his head, overcome by remorse. Emma's eyes glistened with both relief and sorrow, as she whispered, "At last, the truth is known." The butler and Lady Winterbourne exchanged glances filled with grief for the family lost to secrets and lies. Outside, the grey light of dawn broke through the dissipating clouds. Miss Marple addressed the assembly once more. "Let this be a lesson that even the deepest secrets eventually see the light. Justice, however delayed, must be served, not only by the law but by the cleansing of one's conscience." As the constabulary arrived to take Sir Harold into custody, the room remained sombre but resolute. In that final quiet moment, the ghosts of Emberton Hall began to fade, and with them, the oppressive legacy of betrayal was lifted. Miss Marple, ever the gentle guardian of truth, quietly departed, leaving behind a family now forced to confront their past and, at last, begin the slow work of healing.